Hi, friends. This is the Nearly Enlightened podcast, a podcast to help you connect to body, mind, and spirit. I am joined today with Dannica of Subtleties of the Self. Hi, Dannica. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Dannica is a teacher turned friend. I want to talk a little bit about your background. So, if you want to give us just like a little introduction of yourself and what you do, we're here to listen.
Yeah, so well, gosh, where to begin? I feel like I wear so many hats. Um, so you and I met, I'll just tell everyone kind of how we met. So I was working for a yoga company called Booty Yoga, and I was doing their and it's not booty like your butt, just so you know. Like I always have to say that. So I was doing their I was one of their master trainers. So I would travel around and I would teach their YTT units. And I happened to be teaching a unit that Giana was at. And yeah, we became fast friends. And 2000 and early 2020, right before quarantine happened, I had turned in my resignation as a master trainer. And I continued to teach yoga, and I'd been teaching since 2015. I have almost 20 years of personal practice with yoga. I started practicing asana in my late teens for scoliosis. And so anyway, I continued teaching. And then right when quarantine happened, obviously nobody was teaching anywhere. I started to move my business online, as a lot of people did. And I started doing like spiritual coaching, which it just kind of like fell into. And it's funny because I think that I had put in my little questionnaire prior to coming onto this podcast with you, Giana. I had put in there that this is something that was grossly missing from my yoga practice. And even though I have almost 20 years of asana practice, I was very severely neglecting the rest of yoga and what that meant. So my practice was purely physical. And it makes sense because I started my yoga practice as something that was basically like physical therapy. It was something to try to heal my body. And I was still utilizing the practice in a very compartmentalized way. And so when I started to move my business online, and I got into spiritual coaching, shortly after that, I had an accident in my home. And so basically what happened was I got carbon monoxide. Place malfunctioned and leaked carbon monoxide into the house, and I was here. My husband was at work. And so I got really sick. And immediately after that, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder that was subsequent to the poisoning. And I could no longer practice my physical practice. So well, I was in a place where I was like, well, what does yoga look like? What does this look like for me now that I can't actually practice anymore? And so I started to dive deeper into the other limbs of yoga.
Which are so infrequently talked about in the
I
yoga
know.
in the Western community.
I know.
It was kind of similar for me, whereas it started as the physical practice, and then I was like, oh, but there is breath work. Oh, but there's meditation. Oh, but there's self-study, and like all of this
Mm,
other stuff started to come in, and you realize how little the practice is actually about the physical practice of yoga.
I know. Yeah. Well, and the yamas and niyamas,
Yes.
and the preparation of the mind to yoke to the body so that we can actually incorporate the physical practice of yoga. It's an embodiment practice. It's an embodiment practice, and it's about union with God. The whole practice is union. Yoga means union, and it's not a workout, you know? And when I started to dive deeper into the ethical practices of yoga and started incorporating it into my personal spiritual practice, and then my online coaching, because I could no longer teach yoga anymore. So like physical yoga, right? So I had to adapt into teaching it in a different way. So it kind of morphed into spiritual coaching and embodiment coaching, which I feel like is the foundation of everything. If we're not in our bodies, we literally can't do anything that's meaningful. We can't contribute anything meaningful to this planet if we're not conscious and aware and intentional and in our bodies while we're doing it. So that's kind of the short story. It just kind of evolved after I got sick. And it was almost like, I hate to say that, because I feel like this is like a story that keeps getting told over and over again, where somebody has some sort of like catastrophic event and it's turned into something beautiful, and I'm not saying that suffering is from God, but it's almost like it happened
For a reason.
for a reason, so that I could shift my focus, because the way that I was going, I was not going to shift my focus. I was teaching right before quarantine happened. I was traveling every other weekend doing trainings. I was teaching 12 classes a week. I was also playing music. I was I was performing here locally. And if that had not happened, I would have never taken the time to slow down and to turn inward. And I never would have become more well-rounded in, I guess, my experience of being a human. Because I really did draw a lot of my value from my productivity.
I think that so many of us do.
Mhm.
It's like that weird cultural thing that we have going on here in the Western world, where if you're not busy 24/7, then what are you doing?
Right. Well, and I think that plays a major role in our inability to actually become embodied humans. To really become embodied, tap into our multidimensional experience and subtleties of the self, right? And to get to experience what God is through the gnosis of the self.
And I think I
So,
said this to you before we started recording, but I think it's really courageous to start to have this discussion of God, because it's one of those taboo things that you're told from when you're little. It's like, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about God. And it's like, okay, well, we actually need to have these uncomfortable conversations, because if we don't
yeah,
have these uncomfortable conversations, then like, where are we going as a society without these
right.
two things? And I think
Mhm,
that's a super important conversation to start having, which God looks like a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And
mhm,
I don't think we're here to judge what that is.
mhm.
And you kind of had two experiences, big experiences that you mentioned in your form, that kind of led you to that path to God. So do you want to talk about even the first one a little bit, about the vocal injury?
Yeah. So at the end of, well, I guess, yeah, it was towards the end of 2015. It was after our second tour, which was a 6-week tour. And I think we had 3 days off the entire 6 weeks. And we were traveling all over like the East and the Southeast. And I was just overworked. I was overworked. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was struggling with trying to find my roots, I guess, in healing, and also keeping one foot in the music kind of shoves down your throat this rock star lifestyle. So I wasn't taking care of myself. I was drinking a lot. I also was um, taking some uppers so that I could play my gigs, because I was absolutely exhausted running on fumes. And by the end of the tour, I ended up having a vocal injury. And it was a very tough time in my life, because I didn't know if I was going to be able to sing again. And that had been my career since I was about 20 years old. I started performing when I was 17. And after the vocal injury, and I got like a confirmed, it was confirmed that I had vocal nodules, which is like a vocalist's worst nightmare, which is like calluses on your vocal cords where they just slam together. Again, I was forced to slow down and kind of like redirect and shift gears. And I was on 8 months of vocal rest. I didn't want to do surgery because I had heard so many horror stories about irreparable damage happening after that type of surgery on the vocal cords. And so I elected to do 8 months of vocal rest and several rounds of steroid shots. And they eventually did go away. But in the time, it was almost like taking a vow of silence. I couldn't talk, I couldn't whisper, I couldn't sing, I couldn't work. And again, I was forced to slow down. I got super depressed. And that's when I really started to dive into my yoga practice. So again, I will say it's almost like it happened for a reason.
Yeah, to turn towards yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and it made me start to recognize too that I was using my voice for something other than a life-giving purpose. All of my songs that I was writing were all about devils and demons and heartache and drug use and sex and all this kind of stuff. It was very reflective of where I was, at that time, like trying to make it as in a rock band. And I look back on my contributions to society, and it's like I'm grateful for them because that's what I was capable of producing at the time. And I'm glad that I had an outlet to where I could take the pain that was in my body and put it in another body of creation. That way it wasn't living in me any longer. So I really appreciate that. And I can look back at it and be like, wow, yeah, I was using my voice for something other than myself, something other than speaking life and love into my artwork or into society in general, and a lot of people obviously like resonated with what I talked about because we're all living in so much pain. So yeah, that it was shortly after that where I kind of decided to step away from the music industry. I saw that my quest for stardom was originating from a wound, and a need to be seen, a need to be heard, a need to be center stage and appreciated, because I historically didn't have that whenever I was younger. And I connected with my father through music, and he was also a musician. And I had subconsciously convinced myself that he would be proud of me and we would have a better relationship if I were to become what he had wanted to become and failed at. I recognized that I was just decorating my wound with all of this stuff. And that's when I decided to kind of step away from the music industry. And I ended up getting married and became a yoga teacher. And then, I kind of like went back and forth. I played locally here for a little bit. And but then I started teaching. And then it was like, I started to get a taste of what real healing was like, because I started to actually, even though my practice was really purely physical, I was still moving stuff out of my body. Even if I didn't quite understand it or was able to articulate what was happening, I was getting a lot of energetic and emotional and spiritual release from it. And I'm kind of seeing the progression in my mind now as I'm speaking of it. And I'm like, oh, it's like peeling those layers back. And then it was time for me to slow down and turn inward again. But okay, please, dear God, don't let me have some sort of catastrophic injury every time that I need to slow down and turn inward, please.
Yeah, can we just have like a little bit of a stop sign? Like, I'll take it.
Yeah. It's like next time I'm just like, I don't know, shoot me a text or something and be like, you need to slow down.
So funny and so relatable. I also started teaching in 2015, and my practice was purely physical in the beginning as well. And I think that that's kind of like the gateway in,
Mm-hmm. It really is.
and then you just want to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I ended up I ended up finding this class that the studio no longer exists anymore. The teacher is retired, but it was so profound to be like, okay, yoga is not about the movement. And we would go to this class, my best friend Nikki and I. It was a like 2 hour class almost, and the whole first 45 minutes was chanting and just sitting and chanting, and then the next 45 minutes was just, it was kind of a yin class, but it was more focused on the meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And she would have to have people like hang out for another hour after class because you were just in such like a relaxed and just the state that I can't even describe. It was like being drunk on meditation. You were like not able to drive yet, and she would warn you like, stay, hang out, like come back, like ground yourself before you embark out, because it just brought you to this place that it's hard for me to get to that place without that particular practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started to realize that yoga was so much more than the physical practice. And I really wanted to learn more about the meditation and going within. And that is what everyone is adverse to. Every time you bring up meditation, people are like, no, no,
Yeah, it's
not
interesting,
that.
isn't it?
Anything but that.
Yeah, it's a struggle as a teacher to try to get people beyond the yoga postures. And so I've been playing around with that since I started teaching again. I just started teaching again. I had taken some time off where I wasn't even teaching locally because I kind of went into like this hermitage, this spiritual hermitage stage where I was like, I don't know what I'm bringing to my community. I don't know if there's any value in it. I really need to get really clear on what the hell I'm doing and how I can contribute with a purpose to my local community. And so during that hermitage, I think I put in that forum, like I really dove deep within myself and started to cultivate a relationship with God. And it unfolded yoga for me so I could see more dimensions in the practice. And I've started to kind of experiment with different ways in which I can imbue that multidimensionality into my classes whenever I'm teaching now to get people to yoga beyond the poses. And so that's been really fun. It's been really rewarding because I'll bring concepts forward during class. Sometimes I'll theme a class or something like that. And I'll have people come up to me after class and they're like, hey, will you write down that word again, ahimsa, so that I can go and look it up? And I'm like, yes, I will. Yes, this is yoga. This is yoga. You know what I mean? Not that the poses aren't yoga, because that's yoga too. And there's so much more. And I think here, especially in the West, and in this modern yoga industry, we get so fixated on one dimension or one facet of the thing. And then we start to kind of like decorate all of those other things onto that facet. That's like, you have to get the yoga clothes, you have to get the yoga mat, you have to make sure that you're shopping at the right yoga clothing place. You know what I mean? You have to make sure that you're taking the right supplements and all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, and okay, but that's also, those aren't the dimensions of yoga. Those are the dimensions of the yoga industry that we've created here in the West.
Yeah, it's indicative of like the capitalist society. It's like you actually need none of that. Like yoga was meant to be practiced under a tree, like in the grass. Like all of these things that we've created are just to kind of make it inaccessible to just regular ass people who want to connect with themselves.
Well, the commodification of spirituality, I think, is where everything really just gets diluted. And, uh, it gets all the true meaning of it gets lost. My best to bring that back into the way that I teach, because I know, sorry, there's a fly in here. It's like flying right into my mouth while I'm speaking. I know that for myself, I did that with the yoga company that I was working for. I kind of fell right into that. Uh, I guess the commodification, that whole industry, with all of the fixings around like being a yogi, and like what that meant. And um, so I'm really trying to, I guess, come back to a more authentic place where I can bring the actual like full practice of yoga through, because I don't even think that people know, but they're missing out on so much goodness that is a part of yoga when they're just sticking with the postures and making it a workout.
Yeah, for sure. And like for me, I know that I also took time off. I think you know this. It was before that training. I took a big chunk of time off teaching too, because it's kind of like you get to this place and you're like, what am I doing?
Mhm.
Like I'm just perpetuating this like yoga fitness. Like I was even teaching yoga at gyms, and it was like
Yeah.
they weren't like in a space to receive those themes. And I just felt like I was spinning my wheels, and I was like, I need to take a huge step back. And I also stopped practicing the physical practice of yoga, not because um I was burnt out. I was working at a studio that was paying us like literally nothing, and she was making all of this money. And it was like, okay, these people are coming to learn from me, and I'm just like burning myself out. And everyone kept saying, well, there's no way you can make money doing this. And I kind of got to the place where I was like, oh, you're right. I can't make money doing this because like it's not working. And I took a huge break, and coming back to the practice, it was more the first time I took a yoga teacher training, it was purely for myself. I didn't think I was going to teach after that. And a friend who was also a yoga teacher, her and her husband owned a gym, and she was like, no, actually, you're going to start the day after you graduate and you're going to teach here. And that was a great experience because it made me get out there, and it made me realize that I knew nothing after a 200-hour teacher training. And it made me dive deeper and want to know more. So I read all of the yoga books, the sutras, the Bhagavad Gita, like anything I could get my hands on. And then I started to do more and more trainings. And then I get to this place where I'm burnt out. I was teaching 18 classes a week, trying to
My
make it.
gosh.
Yeah, it's like ridiculous. Like I was at like one day I was at like 3 different studios. It was like totally
Yeah.
unsustainable. I was all
Yeah.
over the state of Rhode Island, which isn't big, but it's a lot of driving. And I was just like completely burnt out, and I needed to take a step back. And that's when I found meditation and breath work. And I started to go to sound baths and like all of these other things that were helping me connect to myself, but also connect to God, which I had pushed away. Like, grew up Catholic,
Hmm.
lots of trauma there, went to Catholic school my entire life. Like, I could probably read the Bible back to front like 1,000 times. Um, so now it was coming to a place of like, okay, what is God beyond religion? What is God beyond yoga? Like, what
Hmm.
does this connection look like for me? And it was a very uncomfortable conversation to start to have, because people watch the evolution of you. And it's like I went from being Catholic to atheist to now coming back to acknowledging that there is a creator,
Hmm.
there's a person that is a being that is here to guide and really just wants us to enjoy this physical plane. Like, why do we complicate it so much?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I love that you brought up the books too, because I've gone back and I've been rereading all of the books that I was reading whenever I did my yoga training. And I remember thinking that they were so boring and scriptural. And I'm reading them and it's like riveting. I'm like hanging on every single word. And I'm like, I literally was not available to even understand what was in this book. Like I didn't have the capacity at that time to even understand it. And I'm reading it all now. And I'm like, this is everything that I have kind of unfolded within me on my own in the last 2 years. And it has so much to do with God, so much to do with God. And I was raised Pentecostal. So a lot of trauma there, but we have really good music. Um, and so, yeah, very similar. I basically denounced God. I was like, no, if religion is God, I don't want anything to do with it. But what I've come to understand is that humans complicate everything. They have been gatekeeping God since the dawn of time. And we don't need any intercessors for God, because God lives in us. God is not a be it's is not a person, not even a being, but a pure, untainted principle or a law of the universe. It is a living consciousness that is present in everything that is alive. And this is exactly what Muskogee culture, which is my dad's side of the family, it's everything that indigenous culture believes. And I've gone through so many, I almost like an emotional roller coaster, I guess, or like a spiritual roller coaster, struggling and grappling and battling with myself and all of trying to untangle everything that society has tangled up inside of me around, like, what is creator, what is God. And the only thing that I can say is that when you begin your healing journey and you're actually doing your shadow work and you're going in and you are addressing your patterns and your behaviors and healing your wounds, creating more space, actually like removing those densities, purging out those densities that are held within the body and those patterns that are held within the nervous system, you're actually making changes to your behavior. You're creating more space for yourself, to your spirit and your consciousness to embody into your human being. You begin to know yourself on a deeper level. And that's where I found God. Not that I am God. I'm not God, but I am a creation of God. And because I am a creation of God, the essence of God is found within me. And so when I stopped looking outside of myself for God and I started focusing on myself, that's where I actually found God. And that's why people are so averse to it, because they don't want to go in here. They don't want to look at themselves. And I think I read some proverb, and it's not a Christian proverb. It was from another culture, and I can't remember what culture it was, but it was something like God was like, where can I hide where the humans will never find me? It was like, in the humans, right? They'll never look there. And it's true. People don't want to go there because it hurts.
Yeah.
It hurts to try to sift through all the bullshit, all of your own shit, and own your shit without shaming your shit. It hurts to go in there and start to make sense of it all. And that's where God is.
Mic drop. That's like, okay, we're done here.
Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. It's the end of the podcast.
On that. We'll talk to you next week.
So
I think
that's my personal experience anyway. And when I work with people online, that's what we work on is, they want to have a relationship with God, but first I have to teach them how to have a relationship with themselves.
And that is so hard. I mean, that's what I spent my whole teens pushing away.
Mm-hmm.
And then my whole 20s became A, unlearning, and B, really taking a hard look within. And it was really hard to forgive myself for some of the things that I had done previously. And that was something that I basically worked on my entire 20s. And it's hard to talk about when people don't get the benefits of like sifting through. Like, I went through a deep, dark period, like we'll call it a dark night of the soul. And you're right, like sifting through all of that shit is so hard. And what you said in your form about what your mom says, shit makes the garden grow. Like,
yeah,
that is so, yeah, like, yes, absolutely. I totally agree with that, because I came into my 30s a more grounded person. I came into my 30s with more direction, passion, and purpose than I had ever had before. And yeah, the physical practice of yoga was the gateway to all of that. It's what
Yeah.
made me sit in meditation daily. It's what made me go to, I wasn't going to church anymore, but I was going to these places that felt like I was getting that same kind of community feeling where everyone was meeting together for the same purpose. And I say this to people all the time, like even Jesus said, where two or three gather in my name, there I am amongst you. And for me, that is so important because, one of my best friends got married and her family is also Catholic, like every other Rhode Island Italian family. And her family had a really hard time with the fact that she wasn't going to be married in the church. Some of her family members didn't even go to the wedding because they were like, this marriage isn't going to be blessed by God. And I was just like, okay, let's sit down and unpack this a little bit because, like, first of all, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Don't need to be a priest to bless a marriage. I'm an officiant, like I'm telling you right now, like we're going to call God in and like God is going to bless this marriage. And like all of these things, like you said, it's people gatekeeping God. And that is like the opposite of God.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it really is. It is, but we've been conditioned for so long to believe that we have to have some sort of intermediary in order to make a connection with our creator. And the only intermediary that we actually have to have is the ability to go into the heart space, the ability to heal our own wounds. And this is what I tell people all the time. When people come to me for like a mentorship container or some sort of like coaching session or something like that, I tell them, I have no interest in fixing you. I am not your savior. I am not going to fix you. I can't, call God into this space for you. All I can do is show you what has worked for me so that you can be your own healer, so that you can fix your own self, so that you can, watch me cultivate God in me and share it with you. And so that maybe then you can learn how to cultivate God in you and then share it with others. And a lot of times, people don't want to do the work. They want a quick fix and there isn't one. And I wanted a quick fix too after I got carbon monoxide poisoning, but I didn't get one. And
So
there wasn't another option. I had to do the work. I had to focus on myself so that I could heal, because I couldn't even walk up after being an athlete. I couldn't even walk up and down the stairs to my house without almost passing out, So I had to go into that dark place where my soul was, and I had to pull myself out of hell. No one was going to do it for me. But when I went into my own shadow lands and I sat there, pain that I was feeling, the shame that I was feeling, the hatred for my body, because I felt like my body betrayed me, even though it was doing the best that it could do after it had gotten poisoned. You know what I mean? Like I had to sit there with myself. And when I made the commitment to sit there with myself, God showed up. That's how I met God.
That's so powerful. And I think so many people can relate. So, for somebody who is in the thick of that deep, dark place, that dark night of the soul, or whatever it is, what would be like the first piece of advice you give them that, like, maybe it's not even one step forward, maybe it's a half a step forward? Like, what is that piece of advice, that encouragement tip that you could give someone?
Lean into it and ask yourself, what is your intention and your behavior, and what you're doing? What is your intention behind it? Because if you can get really clear on what your intention is, then you can start to unravel all of your patterns. Because for me, it was like when I didn't want to do anything and I wanted to like lay on the couch because I was feeling sorry for myself, and I didn't, there were days when I really did need the rest. Yes, I needed the rest because, because I needed to regenerate and I needed to heal and stuff like that. And there were days where I felt sorry for myself. I was sick of this shit. I was depressed. I wanted to sleep and just watch movies all day. I didn't want to get up and try to condition my body. I had muscle atrophy. You know what I mean? My joints were hurting. I didn't want to get up and do that. And so I would ask myself, what is my intention in making this decision to lay down and not do anything? Do I need the rest? Or am I pissed off? Am I depressed? And get really honest with yourself. And then I would be like, I'm pissed off. I'm depressed. I would go in there and be like, why? Why? Because I feel like my body betrayed me. Why? I would keep asking myself why. I would keep pulling back because I was an athlete. And then I would get to a point where I would be like, oh, I would start to feel compassionate for myself, right? I would be like, okay, it's okay to feel like your body betrayed you. And you also have to know that your body is doing the best that it can. It's made to heal. It's made to heal. Your body will not betray you because it's not in the program, right? Your body's doing the best that it can in a poisonous, toxic world, and you just got poisoned. And can you feel compassion for your body? Can you bring love into this space? See how that changes how you feel right now. So I would go in, I would unpack my anger, all my resentment toward my body. What is my intention behind feeling that? I was just making myself more sick, right? So I had to go in and find the source of all of that, sit with it, lean into it, allow myself to feel it, and get really specific on what I was feeling, because only whenever you know what you're feeling and you can actually organize it, can you process it and discharge it from your body. Otherwise, it's chaos. There's no order in it, right? Creation is order. It is. So if you're going to speak life into something, you have to get really clear about what it is that's bothering you. Be very specific about it. Jesus said, we're talking about Jesus said you can cast out any demon by knowing its name. So getting very clear with myself, being very specific, and then sifting through the pain, the resentment, the hatred, the betrayal, the self-betrayal. How am I betraying myself right now? This isn't really what I want to be doing, is nothing, and not making myself get better, and hating my body, sending those hateful vibrations to my body, making it more sick, telling myself I hate myself. That's not making me better, So am I betraying myself by doing this? So it got to a point where I had to sift through all of that, get very specific with what my intention was. And then it got to a point where it started to change. I started to feel differently towards my body. I started to recognize that my body was doing the best that it could with what it had. What could I add into it to make its process a little easier? Started working with a pro-metabolic nutritionist. Her name is Shannon Morton. She's incredible. She helped me remineralize my body. And then it started forward momentum, right? And then, so that would be, I guess that's my advice, is to just be very specific and get very clear with yourself. Ask yourself, what is your intention? And if you don't know what your intention is, keep asking yourself the questions until you get very clear about what it is. This is a part of yoga too. Single pointed mind. Yeah.
Single pointed focus. Yeah. Yep. Single pointed mind. That's right in the sutras. Like, it's so funny because if anyone really wants a like how to heal guide, it's like read the sutras. But it's funny because when I started teaching yoga in 2015, I bought the sutras and the Bhagavad Gita. I did not read them until 2019, almost 2020. So it's like your body kind of knows when you're ready. And at that time, when I was a baby yoga teacher, I was not ready to go into that. I don't think I would have even comprehended.
Oh, I didn't. I read it cover to cover and I was like, what the fuck did I just read?
You're reading like these ancient translations, and it's just kind of like that in itself can be overwhelming and can be a reason to block yourself from it. But being patient, and like when I did finally read it, it was literally, I finished reading both of them February 2020. So like right before quarantine happened. And I really feel like that was the perfect time. I was like, preparing for this spiritual war that was happening, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's even funnier because we in the Western world, we think of the Bhagavad Gita as a sacred text. And I have a client who is Indian, and he was like, the Bhagavad Gita is children's stories. They're like fables to like help children
Like
create
Aesop's
a conscious,
fables.
yeah, like a conscious compass. And I was like, oh my God. But that's like kind of where we are in the Western world. Like
Mm-hmm.
spiritually, we're children because we haven't really learned the path yet. So yeah, like start there. Start with that little fable of like a children's bedtime story, because that really, I feel like prepared me for 2020.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was something I was going to say as you were talking, and then I forgot it. I was going to add something on there, and I just kept listening to what you were saying, and then my mind started to wander, and I was like, oh, I lost it.
Going back to the sutras. The sutras are what I feel like that is a great place to start. There's thousands of translations, so
Mhm.
really just like pick one that resonates with you. I have like the simplest, it's so short. I mean, I think the real sutras are only like 33 pages or something like super, super short. So it's really the translations that give it like more fluff. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah,
Well,
just like,
that's the point of it. That's the point of the sutras, because sutra means thread. So they're just, it's the barest thread that could give you anything to go off of to follow the thread to God. That's the whole point of it. Is all of the other stuff like the I can't remember his name, but Satchidananda, was that who did the translations of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali?
I'm not even,
I think it was Swami Satchidananda, but he was the one who wrote all of those chapters to create that book. But the sutras, like you said, are only like 33 pages, which is an interesting number too, 33. That's that Christ number, right?
yep.
Um, it's and that's the whole point, and it tells you at the beginning of the book is so that you can take that little thread and begin to weave your own tapestry to find your way back home through those threads. And the Yoga Sutras, I mean, when I reread that book and I reread the Yamas and Niyamas by Deborah Adele, and I'm just going through and I'm rereading all of my yoga philosophy and like ethics books that I had bought whenever I did my training. And it's just, like I said, completely different state of mind. And it's like you will not understand it unless you are spiritually mature enough to understand it, till you get to a place of evolution where you actually have the capacity to hold that information. And it's fascinating how that happens, because this is like the third time that I've probably read this book. I'll probably, read it more and more so that I can gain more clarity and more insight on it. But the ancients knew what they were doing.
Oh yeah, for
They
sure.
knew what they were talking about. Yoga is a user's manual to get to God.
Yes, absolutely. It's like everyone is searching for that how to do life manual. It's like we actually have it. You just
Mhm.
probably pushed it away and don't want to read it.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
I was reading the sutras, that's what I kept telling everyone. I was like, oh my God, this is literally like the user's manual to this like flesh sack
Mhm.
and like body,
It
mind, and
is.
spirit. It really is. And it's funny because it's almost oversimplified to the point when like the first time you're reading it, you're kind of like, LOL, is this real? Because it's like you could do this, this, and this, or you could just sit by yourself quietly and om.
Yeah,
And it's
it is. Well, and I think too that humans have overcomplicated everything in our attempt to try to find the truth. And the truth is here right in front of our faces. It has been for a very long time. And the truth is not complex. The truth is simple. It's very simple. And the complexities that we encounter are a byproduct of our humanity, our humanness.
yeah, absolutely.
And if we can get out of our own way The truth is very simple.
Very simple. So if there's one thing that you really want listeners to take away from this episode, what is that?
There's so many things, but I guess my biggest one, and this is what I want people to understand in general, especially about God. God is not a person in the sky. God is not a personality. God's not a character. If we could step away from character worship, if we could step away from personality worship, celebrities would be obsolete, right? Religion would be obsolete. We would also start to dismantle all these worship programs that we have around like other people, like the guru and things like that, like all...
Yes.
Yeah.
Guru culture is like what it fucking kills me. Like I can't even with it. Because my whole practice and what I work with clients is you are the guru. You have to find the guru within. Like there's no person outside of you that's going to help you, not even me. Like I am just a guy. Like I think you said this actually in the training. Like
Pretty good guide.
I'm not an expert. I'm not a master of anything. I'm just a pretty good guide. And that's like how I feel. It's like, and even when I was searching, like, yeah, I was searching for something outside of me until you have that aha moment, the light bulb goes off, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, this is what they're talking about. Like, you can't go to seminars and classes, you cannot energy work this away. Like, you have to go within, you have to do that thing that you are pushing away, which is meditation, which is prayer.
Well, and we hold so much shame. We're so ashamed of our humanity that we are obsessed as humans with worshiping things outside of us to try to make ourselves feel worthy, And so we worship celebrities, we worship, figures of authority, we worship teachers, we worship politicians, we worship musicians, we pedestal teachers, people who are supposed to be just guides, and we turn them into, deities. We turn everyday people into deities. We turn everything into some sort of deity, some sort of golden idol, some golden calf that we're worshiping, right?
Yeah.
And if we can dismantle the personality worship, it's a cult. It's a cult. If we can dismantle the personality worship, I think we would have such a deeper understanding of God and our pathway to finding God, because we would understand that we are worthy to have a relationship with God. The path is our wounds. It's our unique roadmap to find our way back home. If you know what your wounds are, you literally are holding the key to your enlightenment. You have to pass through the gateways of your wounds by healing your wounds to find the place where God resides within you. And God, like I said, is not a character. It's not a personality. God is a living consciousness that is a law of this realm, this universe. It's the law of creation, and it holds the masculine and feminine principles together. They're inseparable. But and we always talk about the masculine this, the feminine that, all this stuff too, but it's like we're still compartmentalizing. It's still a personality. It's still some sort of character that we're building, in our minds. It's still a false idol. And when we start to cultivate wholeness, and we can actually view the principle of God through a lens of wholeness, we start to understand that it's inseparable, and it isn't a character, that it is just it's a pure principle that drives creation. So that's what I want people to understand that so badly, because I'm tired of the personality worship, because it drives society towards the whole
It's a
like celeb fandom type thing. And it's like, and I saw this too whenever I was doing the yoga trainings and that yoga community that we were both a part of.
And I think really in any yoga community, to be honest.
Well, there was such a celebrity status with being a master trainer. And I just didn't like it. It made very weird. That's why I always told everyone, I was like, I'm a pretty good guide. I'm not a master of anything. I don't like the name. I'm just a regular person doing the best I can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what comes out of that too is like we can look back on that specific training is like they were actually, and it wasn't any fault of, I don't think it was like a fault or like anything bad, but there was some misinformation
Oh, yeah.
in there. And I think you and I both dove into that a little bit. And I think that is what is kind of dangerous about a 200-hour teacher training is like you really don't learn shit. And there is one governing body, Yoga Alliance, and it's like if you're not in this Yoga Alliance cult, then you're kind of cast away from the yoga community, and it's
Mhm.
just creating that idol worship and putting teachers up on a pedestal where it's like this is also the opposite of yoga.
Well, Yoga Alliance is a business.
Yeah.
It's a governing umbrella that makes you abide by certain rules and regulations like any other corporation. You know what I mean? And that's not something that is a thing in the East. Yoga Alliance is a Western creation.
Yep.
And I understand the benefits of having some type of governing body or something like that that would make us adhere to a certain amount of like continuing education and stuff like that. It's like, I get it, and I also understand what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's it's such a it's such a nuanced topic.
Yeah, all the subtleties.
Yep. And that was part of the reason why I even took a break because it's like, you're going deeper, deeper, deeper. And the deeper you go, the more you're like, everything is a lie. And that is
Yeah.
so hard.
Well, and I think too, the deeper that you go, you start to find yourself coming back into a moderate place of balance because you'll find that God doesn't live in the extremes. God's not on the fringes of anything, right? God exists in the middle where there is nuance because that's where the truth is. The truth isn't on, either side of the pendulum, right? It's like it's right there where we find that balance and there's that fluctuation thing that I find that people have a hard time in regarding God and understanding. And I know we're coming up on time, but I do want to say this is like, when we talk about truth and what truth is, because that's something that I talk a lot about, in my work as well, and getting people to understand what objective truth is and subjective truth is, and where God is, the truth doesn't change. It's something that exists because God is pure principle. It is the law of creation, the law of the universe. That's something that cannot be twisted and manipulated to fit our own agendas. And there's subjective truth, which is like my truth, your truth. We're seeing through the lens of our own experience. And but we have to understand that that's actually just a belief, and those change as we begin to evolve. And our truth can, our subjective truth, my truth is indicative of my experience, and it could be rooted in a wound, and that certainly is not the absolute truth, right? But that's the truth of my experience at this time until I start to um unfold more. And so that's something that people, I think, turns off people when it comes to God as well, because people don't want to think in absolutes. They don't want to think that they're doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? And this also becomes a conversation around like ethics, values, and morality as well, which is the yamas and niyamas, right? Because the people want to be able to do whatever they want to do with no repercussions. And a lot of Christian people want the same thing because Jesus was their scapegoat, which means that if they don't sin, he died for nothing. you know?
That is
So
a great way to look at it. And I think going through any kind of spiritual journey, you kind of grapple with these topics, and we have skewed morality so greatly in this culture. And even, yeah, like even in Christianity, like we kind of use these excuses or these like loopholes to do whatever we want. And going back to like the rock star kind of persona, it's like we've perpetuated that in society of like this sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of lifestyle. And like, I think we're starting to see talks about it a lot is like I think in our generation, sex was something that was like very casual, and like casual sex was put up on a pedestal, and it was kind of like, this means that you're like a free feminine, and like this is what the feminist movement is about. And it's like, no, no, not at all. We've taken morality completely out of it. Like, we need to realize that that is a huge energy exchange, and there's nothing casual about it.
Well, there's such a thing as false empowerment.
Yes.
And when people are, we have to come back to that place where we're like, what is the intention behind our actions and our motivations and what we feel like we need to do? Objectifying yourself and before anybody else gets the chance to do it is not actually empowerment. Having sex casually with people in order to make yourself feel liberated or in control is not actually empowerment. It's false empowerment, because we're making these decisions. I'm going to use myself as an example here. I'm not going to say that everyone is doing it, because, you know, I have found in myself that when I was participating in casual sex, and I was using sex to manipulate people to make myself feel powerful and in control, it was because it was rooted in a wound. I felt empowered and I felt powerful when I used it as a way to gain control, keep control. And when I can look back at sexual trauma that I experienced in my early teens, I can understand that I was doing these things subconsciously. I had certain preferences and things that I liked because I was subconsciously trying to replay my trauma so that I could simulate the same thing, but me being in control, because I wasn't in control when I was sexually assaulted. Right. So again, we just have to unpack it. We have to be courageous enough to unpack these things and really reflect on what is our intention behind it. Where is this rooted in ourselves? Where are we trying to exhibit control? And what are the repercussions of it? Because all of these things are very real, but I think nobody really wants to address it because they want to be like, I'm empowered, I can do what I want.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like, that's the illusion of choice. Are you really empowered, or are you shackled by your trauma and replaying it?
This is something that I actually just looked at. I did like a 12-day emotional repatterning. And like, this is to say, like, you never reach a point where you're not working on yourself and you're not unpacking these things. Because even in my state of 10 plus years of healing, like, there are still things where it's like, oh, I'm still showing up as that person who is kind of showing up in that wound space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm working on. That's what I'm working on now. And so this isn't something that you ever stop working on. And like I said in my podcast before this, like, the road can kind of seem lonely at times. And what I want to use this platform for is to help people realize that there is support out there, and it's not going to give you the answer. You're not going to take this class and like it's going to like heal all of your trauma, drama, and bullshit. But it's a step in the direction of looking inwards and to realize that there is support, there is a community, and it's beyond like a superficial social media community.
I think what you said too about like you're never not working on yourself. I think that also frightens people because it's daunting to think that you don't ever get to rest. But even in your rest, you're working on yourself, you know. But it's it is not a quick fix. It's not a one and done. It's a journey, and I believe that's the point of our human experience.
Yeah, and talking to a friend yesterday, he said to me like, sometimes the healing starts when you just accept where you are and you look at that as a place to take a step from.
Mhm. Yeah.
So with that said, what are some of your offerings? Where can people find you? Time to plug yourself.
So my website is subtletiesoftheself.com. A 12-week mentorship container that I offer. It's a one-to-one, me working with clients and tailoring a specific program for them to, focus on identifying patterns and interrupting those patterns, cultivating relationship with the self, nervous system nourishment, stuff like that. I also am about to launch a program called the Vocal Pelvic Correlation, which I'm really excited about as a retired professional vocalist and musician. That was something that I found to be super beneficial in my own healing process whenever I had my vocal injury, and how I kind of started to connect the dots between the wounds that I had in my pelvic area and how it related to my throat and the color of my voice, how I was using my voice and all of that. So I'm about to launch that probably the first week of October. So that will be available on my website as well. And I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, I have a digital journal that is a somatic exploration journal for people who want to start the process of what I call somatic articulation, which is what I teach in my one-to-one sessions. But if they want to start that journey on their own, it's kind of like a curated digital journal for them to print out and start that journey on their own. And I think that's pretty much it. But all of my offerings can be found on my website, which is subtletiesoftheself.com.
That journal sounds amazing. There are all these things that I'm coming on now. It's like, wow, if I had that 10 years ago.
I know.
Thank you, Danica, for coming on. I so appreciate it. It's been a blast chatting with you.
Yes. Thank
If
you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. If you liked this podcast, please like, subscribe, share, and we'll talk to you next week.